Morning, everybody. I can see people joining our webinar this morning. We'll just let another few seconds to let everybody join, and then we will start. In the meantime, if you do want to use the chat box in terms of explaining who you are, and I can see somebody's already used it, so thank you. Lucy has joined in as a message to everybody if you want to explain who you are. But as we go through the presentations, if you have questions you'd like to ask the panel, probably not me, you'd be pleased to know, then please dive in and ask the questions through the chat box, and then at the end I will go through the questions and we'll see if we can beat the team, as it were. All right, so just another few seconds. I can see a couple of people just coming through. Perfect. I can see some people using the chat box already. So I will start. Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Major from the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to this webinar this morning featuring remote working, security do's and don'ts, staying top of the evolving threats to business. And I suppose the threats have evolved particularly even more so in the last few months, now that we're all working from home. And I think that exposes a lot of businesses' security to their data. You know, I think for myself, having spent time working at home, not to mention the ubiquitous coffee shop, who else is exposed? But COVID has a lot to answer for, to be fair. Before we just roll into the event itself, I'd just like to remind everybody, for those who've looked at the Thames Valley website, of our latest awards for Thames Valley Heroes, which is born out of the COVID crisis, because I guess if we reflect in that March and April periods when, you know, when the pandemic was at its height and people were dying and getting ill, all of our businesses that we have in the Thames Valley were helping each other, whether it was delivering things, producing things, just going the extra mile in the community. So the Thames Valley Awards, Hero Awards, are there to reflect all those people that have done that extra work in our businesses. So if you've got a business, it doesn't have to be a Thames Valley Chamber member, but you know of a business that's gone that extra mile, then please go to our website and look at Thames Valley Heroes. After this event, I will be sending out a copy of the slides and the link to the Thames Valley Heroes site. So please take a look. And even if you think it's your local shop that's done good deeds, then please make sure they are nominated. But without further ado, let me introduce you to the talking heads on the side of your screen. We've got John Ashanaski from Cloud One. Good morning to you. And then we've got morning. Alan Platt from Cyberhive.
Good morning.
And last but by no means least, Philip Jackson, also from Cloud One. Good morning. And I'm going to hand you straight on to John now to begin. Over to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to our Secure Remote Working webinar. As Tim just introduced myself, my name is Jonathan Alisiewski. I'm the joint owner of Cloud One, and it's fantastic to welcome you all here this morning. So within this webinar, we are going to focus on key cybersecurity best practices that require both business and end user consideration and attention. We will attempt to showcase cybersecurity solutions to keep you and your businesses safe and one step ahead of the cybercrime. So without further ado, let's get started. So cybersecurity is a big issue with no end in sight. Lots of well-known big household name companies have hit the headlines over the last few years, and I'm just going to run through some of those examples. In 2018, Marriott suffered a data breach exposing records of 500 million of its customers. The British Airways data breach in 2018 had almost 400,000 of their customers had their personal details and bank cards stolen in what has been reported as one of the most severe cyber attacks in the UK history. In response, the airline is now facing a staggering £183 million penalty. In December 2019, Travelex paid hackers around $2.3 million in ransom following a cyber attack where personal customer data was stolen. So are things getting easier in 2020? No, they're not. We're seeing that the trend continues, again, with major brands falling victim of cybercrime. Again, I'm going to run just through a few examples of these. Alarmingly, once again in 2020, Marriott International Hotels exposed information of 5.2 million of their guests. Facebook, well-known brands that we know, Facebook, more than 267 million Facebook profiles were listed for sale on the dark web. Zoom, the credentials of over 500,000 Zoom teleconferencing accounts were found for sale on the dark web. And another known brand, Twitter. A security lapse on Twitter caused the account information of a social media company's business to be, their users' details to be left exposed to cyber criminals. All the above data breaches are examples of where the impact has exposed customer personal data, such as email addresses, phone numbers, credit card details, home addresses, national insurance numbers, and so on. And of course, GDPR regulations come into force, and the GDPR has really upped the ante, introducing large fines for data breaches that can be up to 4% of the company's global turnover. We are seeing that the ICO and their European counterparts are really starting to show that they have teeth by imposing these fines. Lots of data is being taken from big companies, as I've just given those examples in those last previous slides. But the reality for SMEs is even more stark. Half of all SMEs who suffer a data breach will go out of business within 2 years. The volume of cyber attacks since the COVID-19 has risen, and cyber criminals have been unashamedly exploiting the mass move to remote working, of which Alan's going to cover in more detail a bit later. But insurance is no solution, even if they pay out on a claim, which at the moment is definitely not guaranteed. Just think about these two questions. Who would work with a company they don't trust to keep your information safe? With COVID-19, the rise of home working and changes in practice have been rushed through, often with ill-thought security adaptations. The hackers are taking advantage and adapting their attacks to the new normal, and business is just not keeping up. Think about your home environment. Home networks have a load of stuff in them that could introduce vulnerabilities. Sure, you probably have a firewall provided by your broadband provider, but how secure is it? Also remember that your TV, audio equipment, your Amazon Alexa, and even your light bulbs nowadays may be connected to your Wi-Fi. So that means that those devices know your Wi-Fi password. So you don't need to hack the Wi-Fi, you just need to hack the IoT device and you can be inside your network. So now I'm going to pass over to Alan, just to run through how are the cyber criminals targeting us.
John talked there through just the scale of some of the attacks, and I can't emphasize enough quite how dangerous these attacks can be. Sometimes the headline figures as well actually are just the start of the story. So the Travelex hack, for example, in January, yeah, it's cost Travelex a very large amount of money, a couple of £1 million of ransomware was paid. But the reality is that nobody trusts Travelex anymore. And in fact, the business is currently up for sale because they are pretty much going out of business if they don't sell themselves and sort it out. So it can have such a big impact on even those very large, very secure businesses who've been working with banks for decades. So imagine what kind of impact it can have on small businesses. So the question is, what are the cyber criminals actually doing in order to try to make these data breaches? And most people think of cyber attacks as criminals hiding in a darkened room using really clever hacking techniques to gain access to our data. They think of nation state actors and cyber criminals from Russia and China. And while that is true, that does happen, that's actually reserved for very high value targets such as banks and governments. For most of us, that isn't the problem. In fact, that kind of image of extremely crafty hackers couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that actually new ways of working have actually brought new types of attacks as well. So the rise in everybody working from home has actually changed things quite significantly. According to Mimecast, who's one of the companies who looks at quite a lot of email traffic, the volume of cyber attacks has actually increased by about a third since lockdown started. And the proportion of those attacks targeting home workers has increased from just 12% before COVID-19 to a massive more than 60% of cyber attacks and attacks are starting on home workers now. Most cybersecurity professionals, more than 95% of them, believe that the COVID-19 crisis increases the threat to enterprise systems and to data, with only a tiny number of those people believing that the threat is properly mitigated and properly managed. And more than 2/3 of people have expressed concern about the vulnerability of systems and networks that are being used by quarantined workers. So these cybersecurity professionals who've put in place the IT systems that we're all currently using when working from home know that they've done a rush job on them, know that those systems are vulnerable. Only a tiny percentage, I think it's latest stats were 15% of people believe that cyber operations threat flow will return to normal after the COVID-19 crisis as well. People think that this is going to stay as it is at the moment. People are going to be working from home, and that's where cyber criminals are going to keep attacking. So what techniques are the attackers actually using? Well, actually probably one of the most common forms of attack that is out there, which Phil will talk about a little bit more in a bit later, is what's called a brute force attack. Working from home means that all of the accounts and servers that used to be safely protected behind corporate infrastructure and only accessible from inside the office, they've had to be opened up because remote workers need to be able to access them. And that means that one of the first things a criminal will do is just throw an automated bot and use an automated bot to throw a dictionary or server in an attempt to break a password. And the scary thing is that works surprisingly often. Often people are using passwords from other accounts which have already been compromised. For example, the attacks that John talked about earlier and various others, such as Yahoo a few years ago, had an attack in which 3 billion users were impacted. And that means there were 3 billion users' passwords on the dark web. How many of those passwords are still in use in secure systems? That attack actually includes, for example, Sky customers who didn't even know they were using Yahoo. And what these attackers are trying to do with these brute force passwords is they're trying to gain a foothold. And from there, they can kind of spread out. They can get into servers, they can get into central systems, they can send emails in your name, they can use that to start phishing. And they may even be able to install things like keyloggers on your local system to get passwords to other systems. So one weak password can give people a foothold into your system, and they can then go from there to spread into other systems. Another very common type of attack is what's commonly called a drive-by download, but this is typical where a user accidentally or intentionally clicks on a link on either a website or an email, and that takes them to something that's infected with malware. And here a criminal's hoping to exploit weak cyber defenses. If you're in an office situation, your PCs have probably got some pretty good anti-malware in place, so these attacks are stopped very quickly. But if you're using your home devices, how good is your antivirus software? How well set up is it? When was it last updated? There are lots of websites out there that are simply set up to spread malware. And there's actually a lot of sites which, while they're perfectly legitimate sites in their own right, those sites were subsequently compromised. WordPress is particularly prone to this. So somebody will compromise a WordPress site, they will install some malware onto that WordPress site, which means that when you then go onto that website and you click on something, it may give you the information you were looking for, but it may also give you a Trojan or some malware spread at the same time. And again, if your home PC gets infected, they use that to steal credentials and access otherwise secure business systems. And those kind of drive-by downloads typically are using what's called a vulnerability exploit. I mentioned that platforms like WordPress, widely used for web hosting, are often targeted. They will find a vulnerability that is not well known or hasn't really been exploited very much, isn't covered properly by current antivirus software, and they will use that to get simple and very easy to defeat viruses on the system. But they'll do it before the antivirus systems and the antivirus companies have caught up. Now, it's fair to say that this is kind of an arms race. Cybersecurity professionals are finding and closing vulnerabilities all the time. But to give you an idea, there are something like 1,000 new viruses coming out every week at the moment. And those new viruses are constantly targeting new vulnerabilities that have previously been undiscovered. Not only that, it also only takes one person to forget to patch something. And that vulnerability, which is now well known and can be protected against, is no longer adequately protected. Travelex was a good example of this. They had VPNs, virtual private network systems, protecting their core critical infrastructure. One of those VPNs, they failed to patch it for several months. That meant that there was a known vulnerability on that VPN. The criminals used that vulnerability to get access to the server. From there, they managed to get that anti-malware, or managed to get malware, and they managed to get a virus inside the corporate network, spread ransomware around the corporate network, and that pretty much took an entire company down. And that was simply one system administrator failed to patch a VPN for a period of a few months. And that simple vulnerability, that failure to patch that server, caused an immense problem down the line. So vulnerabilities are a huge issue. But actually, the biggest single issue that people are exploiting are people. Increasingly, with COVID-19, people have been using working practices that they're not used to. They've been getting emails from their IT teams asking them to install this and change that and modify that configuration. Emails that would look very strange under normal circumstances. But these days, we're accepting that we're having to do things a bit out of the ordinary. And that means cybercriminals are starting to target the weak link. They're starting to target the people even more than they have been doing in the past. If they can trick you into thinking that they are an IT professional from your company, asking you to install something in order to give them access to your PC, or asking you to just make a small configuration change because the servers at your end are changing. I've personally received dozens of emails recently asking me to update the password from a server that I know for a fact does not need to have the password updated. So cybercriminals are constantly phishing to try to get somebody to make a simple mistake. And normally this is easy to eliminate because you just go upstairs and talk to the IT team. And at the moment, while we're all working from home, how many of us will just take as read that that is something that we are supposed to be doing? And the cyber criminals are also getting increasingly creative about their exploiting human error. Some of you may have heard of a tactic called phishing. Well, spear phishing is an increasingly common tactic. Here, it's a bit like phishing. They're basically trying to get you to give them some useful information. But in this case, the criminals really do their homework. They understand as much as they can about the company, the role, what issues you're facing, and they use this to craft very carefully orchestrated attacks. They're often targeted at people high up in the organization, since we don't have much time, but we do have a lot of access. You've probably heard of CEO fraud. Technically, it's not a cyber attack, but it's very closely related. So one example of this a few years ago, a large NASDAQ listed company lost tens of millions of dollars. And in that case, the CEO was actually out in the Far East to complete and sign a deal. And at some point, the accounts department received an email from the CEO saying that the deal had been done. Please pay $80 million into this account right now. And of course, the accounts department knew that this deal was on the cards. They knew it was going to happen soon. They tried to verify the transaction by phoning the CEO, but the cyber criminals were sufficiently crafty. They knew that he was already on a plane, so they couldn't contact him. And since everything looked right, the accounts team went ahead and they made the payment. And of course, it was a fraud. The deal was real, but the email was false, and the account that the money paid into was the wrong one. And spear phishing is a technique that does something very similar to this. They make use of the information that they find out about you on social media. They perhaps interview and talk to people in your company to get a good idea of what's really going on. And if they manage to get all of the information they want, they can craft and create an incredibly complicated email trail that will basically make it look exactly like it is a genuine transaction or a genuine activity that's taking part in your business. The problem is, with this kind of technique, sooner or later it's going to happen. Sooner or later, somebody in your organization is going to make a mistake. And it feels like losing one person's credentials or losing some information to a spear phishing attack isn't that critical. But the question is it? If that person has privileged access, it can be a big problem. And even if that person is fairly low level, they might be a good stepping off point to go phishing for bigger targets. And if the person who eventually gets compromised is a system administrator, they might have the keys to your whole kingdom. And that brings me on to my next slide. Now, spear phishing requires somebody to make a mistake. You don't necessarily need to realize you're being the victim of an attack, and that can be a huge issue. And if the person who falls foul of the attack is a system administrator, that effect can be catastrophic on your business. However, system administrators also make unforced errors. I'll give you an example of an AWS and an Amazon Web Services database was left open to the internet with no password. And you think, okay, nobody should do that. That's just stupid. Nobody puts a database on the internet with no password. Well, actually, that's not one example. That's 5. Dow Jones, Alteryx, Experian, Accenture, Verizon, all of them have done that within the last 3 years. Very large databases left completely open on the internet by a system administrator. And also, with literally thousands of lines of configuration code deployed in routers, firewalls, servers, the chance of there being no errors in there is vanishingly small. Penetration testing can help, but it's not foolproof. It's only valid at one point in time, and most systems change regularly. So one simple mistake by a system administrator can give an attacker a foothold in your infrastructure. And even if you spot the mistake and close the door, the attacker might have already gone through that door, might already be in your system, and might have established a base there. So now I'm going to hand over to Phil, who can talk to you about some of the very simple techniques and things that you can use to try to protect yourself against some of these attack methods that the users are using. Phil, I think you might be on mute.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
It works.
Good. So you've heard from the other guys about what could have happened and what's happened. And obviously we're all working from home. So the question is, what can we do as users to protect ourselves? And there's a myriad of things. But unfortunately, there's not one fix that fixes everything. You can't just rely on passwords. You can't just rely on antivirus and firewalls, etc. We need to think more of a deep in defense approach by using an array of techniques to cover all bases. So one of those we can talk about is endpoint security, blacklisting, heuristic, and other advanced technologies that can be used. But still, these technologies still rely on things such as bad patterns or behaviors and specific codes. They're good at picking up viruses that are predominantly out in the wild and are an essential part of any solution, but they're not the only solution. Things like Microsoft. If you're on Microsoft Windows and you're a user, use their Microsoft Defender. It's actually a pretty good product. It's just as good as any other standard antivirus product. So if you have a Windows PC, use it. Make sure you use auto updates, as painful as that may be. But also look at other products and services that don't just look at what's floating in the wild. Look at products that learn and adapt to a user's approach on an everyday basis. And again, there's this myth in the market that amongst users that Mac PCs don't suffer viruses. It's a myth. So let's dispel that right now. They're not immune. So Mac users can get viruses and hacked at the same time. Just wanted to reiterate, so pure antivirus should not be all that is relied on to fix the fact that your systems may be insecure. Some big data breaches, one was mentioned just earlier, which is Travelex, have come about as a result of businesses failing to keep their systems patched. The most important thing you can do to keep your systems is up to date, keep everything up to date. If you are still running an old version of Windows, like Windows 7 or XP, we strongly recommend that those be updated to things like Windows 10. They are more secure. Also, don't think about just laptops. it's not just your laptops that are secured. As John mentioned earlier on, again, while working at home, there's a myriad of products now available that people can hack into. Your routers, your light bulbs, as strange as that may seem, these are anything that's connected to the internet is at risk. So be aware of those. Right. So here's a big one: passwords. We've mentioned it before, and I can hear some murmurs in the room at the moment. Oh, do I have to change my password? Why do I have to change my password all the time? We get it all the time. We understand it, but passwords are a problem. And the simple reason is we try as users and to make it as simple for ourselves as possible. But at the same time, what we don't realize is we're possibly making it as simple for a hacker. We're going to show you a short clip of a video explaining how passwords can be easily hacked if they're too simple.
You know, we've been hearing a lot about cybersecurity lately, largely because of what happened to Sony. Companies and individuals are more concerned about the safety and privacy of their information than ever. President Obama has unveiled a number of new proposals this week to crack down on hackers, and he plans to address this in the State of the Union speech on Tuesday. And it's great that the government is working on this, but the truth of the matter is we need to do a better job of protecting ourselves. You know, the most popular password in the United States is password 123. And as long as that's the case, we're vulnerable. So today we sent a camera out on a Hollywood Boulevard to help people by asking them to tell us their password. And this is how that went.
We're talking about cybersecurity today and how safe people's passwords are. What is one of your online passwords currently?
It is my dog's name and the year I graduated from high school.
Oh, what kind of dog do you have?
I have a Chihuahua Papillon.
And what's its name?
Jameson.
Jameson. And where'd you go to school?
I went to school back in Greensburg, Pennsylvania.
What school?
Hempfield Area Senior High School.
Oh, when did you graduate?
In 2009.
Oh, great.
It's like my cat's name and then it's like a random number.
Okay. Have you had this cat for a while?
Yeah, she's my childhood pet.
Aw. And what's her name?
Her name is Jolie.
Jolie. So like a password of yours would be Jolie and then a number.
Yeah.
Like number 1?
Like my birthday.
Oh, when is your birthday?
June 12th.
Oh, nice. And what year were you born?
95.
Oh, great. So Jolie, 6/12/95.
Yes.
Got it.
So you mean to give my password right now? No, I cannot do that.
But we all want to know what it is so we can tell you.
I think we get the point. You can
Oh
stop
my
the video.
goodness.
Perfect. So it's just a brief example of how easy it is to get these passwords. And you see it's not just done visibly on street corners or whatever else. It's done through social media. There's a lot of things like these tags where you enter your birth date and it will give you a list of what you're good at and all sorts of other things. But those are the kind of things to avoid. Also, not make your passwords easy. Birthdays, names, things like that. Try and restrict yourself from using those type of things, because those are the kinds of things that hackers look out for. So using dictionary words with an O and an I replaced with a 1 and a 0, or just sticking a percentage sign or an exclamation mark at the end of your birth date or your name, it just doesn't work anymore. They're far too clever for it now. So use complex, impossible passwords. Think of phrases. Use a password manager, so you don't have to manage it. You don't have to remember what you've written down. But just try and make it as complex as possible. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be 20, 40 characters. It can be very simple, but just not something that is the norm for yourself, if that makes sense. Okay. One of the, well, if you ask me, possibly the most important aspect to protect yourselves is training. Make yourself aware, make your staff aware of what the potential threats are and what your companies could be facing. The more awareness you have internally, the more you'll understand how to protect yourself and best practices to put in place. Get yourself training from an outside organization if you're not comfortable delivering training yourself. Look at things like Cyber Essentials. visit the National Cybersecurity Centre. I don't know if we have their websites on that slide at the moment. Visit their website. There's heaps of information out there that can help you. Please make yourselves aware. And I'm going to hand back to John or Alan.
It's back to me. So yeah, I just re-emphasize that point as well, because you think that cybersecurity training is expensive and complicated. It really doesn't have to be. Even if you've got zero budget, the National Cybersecurity Centre actually has the ability to go through Cyber Essentials self-certification. So you can go there and actually you can go and certify yourself to make sure that you and your entire company are self-certified to Cyber Essentials, and that would be a massive step up for most businesses. But I just wanted to talk a little bit more about, okay, so let's assume that your company has got all of these basics in place, and actually all of the, potentially, you've got things like password security right, you've got antivirus software in place, you've got all of the things that Phil has just talked through. If you're dealing with highly sensitive data, it is still potentially, you might need to have some of the rather more advanced techniques out there. And as Phil mentioned, there are things that are a step above your standard Windows Defender and making sure that you've got decent passwords in place. If you're dealing with highly critical data as well, even with those things in place, people make mistakes. So it's not a case of if your defenses are going to get breached, it's a case of when your defenses are going to get breached. And you are going to have a data breach at some point in the next 10 years, I will say. So it's a case of minimizing the impact of that and making absolutely sure that you put in place the extra techniques that could be there. So actually, I'll just hand back to Phil very briefly to talk a little bit about Sentinel-1, which is a more advanced endpoint threat detection system.
Thanks, Alan. That's John is handling that, I believe. John?
No, I can talk through that. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alan. So Sentinel-1, as Alan's quite rightly described there, is a fully managed endpoint security solution for small and medium businesses. Their main purpose of their software protects you from malicious intruders, viruses, and ransomware, as we've explained before. So Cloud1, we do have expertise, and we have our expert analysts are dedicated to ensuring the safety of our customers' commercial data, and we adopt Sentinel-1 into our customer base. Some of the advantages that it does are around that. They automatically repair and roll back damage that's already taken place. So they automate it, and they do that in an automated fashion. So they operate what we call at a kernel level, allowing the highly advanced agent to see every action which takes place on your machine from the moment it boots up, and simply reverse anything which is deemed a malicious threat, while simultaneously removing that said threat in its all entirety. So even in the case of the most sophisticated attack, the agent within the Sentinel-1 antivirus will stand firm and will protect you, ensuring that you and your business's critical data and continue to remain untouched. It also looks at leading ransomware recovery. So the Sentinel-1's fully integrated response capabilities extend to the increased ransomware, defeating the known strains through to the true zero-day advanced threats. So if something slips through, we can easily reverse any attack-driven file damage and restore the files back to their pre-execution, previously trusted state with a click of a button. So we can protect and repair from the types of advanced malware, exploits, drive-bys, and script-based attacks that traditional outdated solutions miss.
So what about encryption and VPNs? I'm frequently asked questions about that, because one of the things that comes up is people ask me, well, look, all of my data on disk is completely encrypted. Surely that means that it's totally safe. And the reality is, yeah, encryption is an important part of your toolkit, but no, it does not make your data completely safe. If you think about it, the keys to decrypt that are almost by definition in the computer that you're using to access that data. So yeah, encryption is really good if somebody steals your laptop and they don't have your password. It means that they can't just take the hard drive out and extract the data from it manually. But in terms of protecting you against cybersecurity threats, in terms of protecting you against ransomware or malware or somebody trying to steal your passwords, it really doesn't help at all. Similarly, VPNs, virtual private networks, encrypt your data at the point where it leaves your application or your PC and encrypt it as it transits through the internet and decrypt it again at the other end when it reaches the server. It's brilliant at protecting data from snoopers as it moves over a network. So it's great if the securing data as it flows between your home PC and a secure office infrastructure, for example. But it's only as secure as the devices at each end of the VPN. So an example where you're using an off-the-shelf, as advertised on TV many times, one of those VPNs that connects your home device to the internet, they actually offer, in my opinion, very little real benefit. Most of the data that comes out of your PC is encrypted anyway when it goes over the internet. If you're connecting to a site that's got HTTPS at the beginning, that basically means the data is encrypted. And as soon as it gets into the internet, it can go anywhere. So there's nothing to stop people intercepting the data once it comes out of the other end of the VPN. So yeah, VPNs and encryption are important parts of your cybersecurity arsenal, but they're not panaceas. They don't solve everything. There is another technique as well, though, which is considerably less well known. It's a technique called distributed whitelisting. This is a complex technique that's designed to protect servers, critical infrastructure, against even the most advanced threats that even the top-end antivirus and endpoint protection system simply cannot detect. We mentioned some numbers earlier that the average time at the moment for cyber criminals to detect that for organizations to detect that they've had a cyber attack and lost some data, it's currently running at 208 days for somebody to detect that they've lost data. And the reason behind that is that cyber criminals use the kind of attacks that simply can't be detected by your endpoint protection system, even the most advanced ones on the market. This technique, distributed whitelisting, this will detect absolutely anything that makes its way onto your servers that shouldn't be there. Even if it's a configuration change or a simple script or somebody logging on that shouldn't be logging on in the first place, it can detect absolutely all of those things. And importantly, it can detect it in seconds. So it can cut down the length of time taken to detect your attack from 208 days to 30 seconds. And by detecting those kind of attacks really quickly, you can dramatically reduce the amount of money that's taken to remedy the fault. You can dramatically reduce the amount of data that's lost. And interestingly, if you were somebody like Microsoft and you were using this technology to protect your own servers, you couldn't even hack your own servers without the customers knowing about it. So it can even protect against malicious attacks and insider attacks. This kind of distributed whitelisting is a highly important technique that really does get underestimated compared to what should be out there. I guess the key benefit of whitelisting, as you can see from this slide, is that really where this is focused, this focuses on the kind of vulnerabilities that your standard antivirus software and all of the other techniques we've talked about simply aren't very good at picking up. So actually, it's really, really good at picking up things such as insider attacks, really good at picking up human errors. It can detect the results of spear phishing. It can detect vulnerability exploits that no other techniques on the planet can detect. And of course, it can detect brute force attacks with somebody simply throwing passwords at your server, because as soon as they get onto the server, as soon as they make any changes, as soon as they try to do anything on the server, it will instantly pick them up. But even this technique isn't perfect. It's not great at stopping ransomware attacks. It's actually not great at stopping the generic click on a link attacks that you get with typical downloadable viruses on websites. For those, that's where you need the likes of Sentinel 1 or Microsoft Defender to really give you the best protection. So I would strongly recommend using this kind of technique as an additional layer on top of the other layers that we're talking about, very much for protecting your critical infrastructure. And if you do have some extremely sensitive data, such as organizations that are dealing with highly sensitive emails, whether that be financial or personal information, such as lawyers and financial services institutions, in those cases, if somebody manages to compromise and access your email account, whether it's through a concerted hacking attempt or whether it's through human error, somebody accidentally gives them the credentials and the password to log on to those email accounts, losing a single email could be devastating for your business. And there have been examples in the recent past where organizations have lost access to a few emails, and it's cost them literally hundreds of millions of pounds to resurrect those problems. So CyberHive actually built a solution for part of the UK government. We built this solution. It's called Gatekeeper for Office 365. And it builds on the best-in-class security that already comes with Microsoft's top-of-the-range E5 security products. And it protects email services to an extent that even parts of the UK central government are now using this service to guarantee that their emails, their file sharing, and even their Microsoft Teams accounts are as secure as they possibly can be. And I believe that for the first time, bits of the UK central government are now using cloud-based, Microsoft-based email services for highly sensitive information. This has never happened before the solution came out. And again, if you look at the kind of things that this service is designed to protect against, the standard off-the-shelf Microsoft Office 365 is actually very good at protecting you against basic phishing, against viruses and malware. And it's actually pretty good if you put two-factor authentication on about protecting you against weak passwords. But it's not good at protecting you against credential spoofing, which I won't go into in detail. It's not good at protecting you against a man-in-the-middle attack where somebody steals your data as it flies around the network or goes through to Microsoft. It's not good at protecting you against administrator error. And administrator errors are one of the biggest single causes of very major data breaches. And it's also not very good at protecting you against somebody hacking your infrastructure. Whereas CyberHive Gatekeeper for Office 365 is designed specifically to protect the parts that other solutions out there are really not good at protecting. So if you do have highly sensitive, highly critical email data, get in contact and we can talk to you more about that solution and what it could offer you. I'll hand it to Phil now for the final few slides.
Thanks, Alan. Obviously, we hear about obviously the last couple of years GDPR and how that's put in place and what impact that can have. And we have to look at things specifically for the SMB, because I think the SMB is the area which is going to suffer the most because of the cost of having to implement these practices. So again, look at products out there. One of the products that we recommend is a product called Actify, which enables SMBs to track and protect private data, whether that be in the cloud or whether it be on a device, or bring your own device, which is this whole new thing about BYOD. And the perimeter less world data privacy compliance scenario is one of the biggest risks that face a small business. So when faced with data privacy events, SMBs can't necessarily afford, or for the most part, can't afford the resource it takes to address regulatory scrutiny and fines that are coming out. We heard a figure earlier on, for a data breach, 4% of a company's turnover, not just your profit margin, 4% of your turnover is what people are receiving in fines. So for most SMBs, knowing how to audit data and proactively avoid the liability is key for long-term success. Actify can help uncover data risk and provide actionable risk reduction strategies. It's a comprehensive, out-of-the-box solution. It has all the tracking and control, reporting and deployment, and you can see it in real time. It shows you what your risks are, even to the point where it will show you what those monetary value risks are to your organization.
Perfect. Thank you, Phil. So I suppose the magical question out of all what you've heard through the presentation today, is there a magic fix, a fix-all? No, of course there's not. No, there are plenty of applications where things are just not appropriate. As Alan said, whitelisting is overlooked and underutilized, but it's not a panacea. It works fantastically for protecting servers, but it really isn't appropriate for protecting your laptops, your desktop PCs, your mobile phones. And for these, we need to rely on other tech. You should have antivirus, you should have firewalls, two-factor authentications, and most importantly, staff training to stop these cyber criminals getting in to your critical systems in the first place. But it is just all a part of a toolkit that you should very seriously consider for your businesses. Sooner or later, cyber criminals will get through your best defenses. And then ask yourself these questions. How long will it take you to detect them? And how much data and money would you have lost? So here's my ask of you at the end of the presentation. Hopefully we can help you improve your cyber security. And even if you don't end up working with Cloud1 or CyberHive, we hope that by listening to our webinar today, it's giving you some food for thought and help move your company forwards. So now I'm going to hand back over to Tim. We would like to open it up for a Q&A and would welcome your questions. Hi, Tim. Do we have any questions?
I think Tim's hanging.
Aha. Okay.
We've lost the host.
That's right. Sandra, do we have any questions?
Let's see.
Or I'd welcome any questions to be posted in with the chat.
So one of the questions is, would you be willing to talk for the UCN when we start up? I don't know who that's directed at, but that's from Sandra.
Yes.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that.
We would love to. Yes, of course we would. Yes. Thank you, Sandra. Yes, we'd love to.
And it looks like we've got Tim back as well.
I'm back in the room. I'm back in the room. My Wi-Fi went down, would you believe? But I do have a couple of questions, just coming out of the chat box, and some that I was asked previously to this meeting today, which thank you guys for doing that. I have to say it was all round. There's a lot to think about, isn't there? And stuff that I'd not considered. I will certainly be. Luckily, I don't have Wi-Fi light bulbs. I suppose some of the questions that I received beforehand were I suppose, a bit broader based, around people protecting their businesses. And I think some people were concerned about how do they know that they've got the right information to oversee the cyber risks? It's a very open question, but I guess some people don't know that if they're at risk or not.
No, absolutely.
And check for that.
Yeah. So my recommendation here is if you don't know whether you've got the right information to oversee the cyber risk, you probably haven't. The problem is that a lot of businesses assume that cyber risk is the problem of the IT department, and the reality is it isn't. They can put defenses in place, but they can only put defenses in place if they know what they're protecting. So I would recommend the first thing any business should do is you should understand what data you've got, understand what data is critical to your business, and understand also what data is sensitive and what problems it would cause you. You then need to understand who uses that data, how do they use that data, where do they access that data from in order to do their job. So you need to think about this from the business perspective of what information you've got, who accesses it, where they access it from. And then you need to think through and do the risk analysis. Actually, is the way they're handling this right? Is it wrong? An example I came across a while ago, there's a company who actually their cyber defenses per se were pretty good. They'd got lots of data that was kept on central servers. The servers were properly locked down. Only the right people had access to it. But then actually following it through, one of the processes, they were sending highly confidential medical information about well-known celebrities by email. And that meant that on occasion, they sent the email to the wrong person or CC'd the email to the wrong person. So just thinking about what you're doing with the data, in that case, one simple slip by the person typing in the email name could have meant that the private medical data about a well-known Hollywood actor could have ended up in the newspapers, and that would have been pretty catastrophic for their business. So
yeah, I think if I can expand on that, and I think from a business perspective and a user perspective, almost employ a zero trust policy in your mind. Even though you might think you have the best of the best to protect your business, always be on the lookout for something new, always be looking out for something that improves what you've currently got. Unfortunately, hackers and the people that want into your organization, and again, I go back to what we said earlier on, is if somebody wants in, they are going to get in. It's not a case of you're not impervious to being hacked. We are going to get hacked at some point. So you have to have that zero trust policy. You have to constantly be on the lookout for what's new and what defenses they are or vulnerabilities they actually cover, because the vulnerabilities change every day. So just be aware of that kind of cycle.
And another question that's arisen, which I think it sort of just ties into the last one a bit, you know, how effective is our cyber security strategy at addressing business risks? I think that sort of rolls a little bit into the last one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slightly open-ended and quite a difficult question to be answered, to be honest. But maybe if I start, actually, the problem with most companies is that they don't actually have a good understanding of how to deal with cybersecurity risk at all. So I think the biggest problem here is that, as I mentioned earlier, the problem is that people tend to delegate cybersecurity risk to the department who they think understands it, and the reality is they don't. So I think it's back to the first point, that you should have a good understanding of exactly what you're trying to protect and how, and then go on to work out how you're going to protect it. Not only that, if you do have a data breach, and sooner or later your company is probably going to have a data breach, you need to know how to manage it. So it's very important to know who's responsible for it, what you can do to lock systems down if you do discover a data breach, what your processes should be for managing it, and who's going to be contacted and who's going to be doing what to manage that data breach. If it's like any other disaster, if your building burns down, you really need to know what your next steps are going to be, and you need to know who's responsible for them. It's exactly the same with cyber risk. Perfect.
Now, guys on the panel, there's a really long question which you may prefer to deal with. So Dr. Rajesh realizes that we're looking at the question, but I think it's quite a lot in it, and I'm not even sure I can talk all the way through it. So maybe it's something to pick up after the meeting, perhaps. But I just want you to know that we're not ignoring it. Am I right, Alan? That's quite a lot of content there, isn't it, for that one?
Yes. Yeah.
I'd definitely be having a talk to Dr. Rajesh afterwards, because that's.
Yeah, we'll come back on that.
About the idea there. Yeah.
Yeah, and then another question arising now. In your experience, team, do you find companies are complacent towards cybersecurity? It won't happen to us kind of attitude. And how dangerous is this sort of attitude toward protecting people's information?
Yes, so absolutely. Companies are complacent towards cybersecurity. So generally speaking, companies don't realise quite how dangerous or how big a risk cybersecurity is until they've suffered from a data breach themselves, by which point it's often a bit too late. And the trouble is that quite often it's not necessarily complacency about cybersecurity. It's almost certainly will be on the risk register of most companies. The problem is that people don't necessarily know what to do with it. And as I said, they delegate it to the team that they think understands it. And often IT teams think of their role in cybersecurity as reassuring the board that everything's all right.
I think it's also to remember old habits die hard. You know, we've grown up with this plethora of products available out there, whether that be firewalls and password policy software, that kind of thing. But what we noticed in going forward is, you know, these kind of things aren't necessarily going to stop everything. You know, they might stop something that is already existing, and we're talking about, you know, something out there already in the marketplace. However, what we've noticed with cybersecurity is, or with hackers, is they're developing new things. You know, we talk a lot about this 0 days. What's not known in the industry? You know, we need to think about what we don't know. How do we protect against what we don't know? That's the problem.
I think that's been a big turning point as well, Phil. Sorry, just to step in there. I think that's been a big turning point. I think that the looking at what we don't know and having a plan in place for that is certainly, you know, where I think more organisations do have to look at and focus on moving forward. Because I said the extent or the sophistication of new hacks that are being developed at a rate of what Adam described earlier, you know, 1,000 new different viruses, different types of viruses being launched into the world, and you know, they're becoming more advanced, and really do need to tighten up your cyber defences around that.
Yeah, you just have to look at the examples we gave earlier. You know, Marriott, British Airways. These are organisations with big, deep pockets. And they've got big cybersecurity teams that work for them, but yet they are still getting hacked. And they have all these things in place. So,
Yeah. And even the best cybersecurity professionals make mistakes. So, okay, I wouldn't classify myself as the best cybersecurity professional. I've got other people in my team who are considerably more knowledgeable than I am on that. But I do know what I'm talking about with cybersecurity. And I made a mistake about 2 years ago now. I failed to patch my own personal website. I left it unpatched for about a month and a half because I forgot about it as I went on holiday. Came back from holiday and discovered that it was spreading malware quite happily across the internet. So if I can get it wrong on my own personal sites, anybody can get it wrong.
No,
I think we've got
question.
another. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go for it, Tim, please.
Yep. Or so are password managers safe, or should we worry about having all our passwords in one place?
It's a very good question. Are password managers safe? So I'm going to answer that a slightly different way. There is no such thing as a completely secure, completely safe system. However, I think that password managers, if you pick a good one, you pick a well-known one, they are well worth having. I personally use a password manager. My business uses a password manager. And the reason for that is that it's considerably more dangerous to use the same password for everything so that you try to remember it and write it down. If you don't have your passwords as complicated, difficult to find and difficult to remember passwords, they're probably going to get breached. If you use the same password in multiple places, one of those places will eventually get breached and your password will be common across everything. So I could not possibly remember the hundreds of passwords that I have that are all different. So they have to be stored somewhere. And in my opinion, password managers, if you pick the decent ones out there and you don't pick tin pot small companies, the password managers that are out there are considerably better than sticking them in an encrypted Excel file on your desktop. Yeah. So yes, I would use a password manager. I do use a password manager.
Yeah.
And I suppose last but maybe not least, what is a question, what should we do in the event of a cyber breach? It's probably an operational question more, but I guess there's some simple tactics to take at that point where you realise that actually you have been hacked and attacked.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, there are certain things that you need to do if you've been hacked and attacked. The first thing is get onto it very quickly, because the longer an attacker is in there, the more damage they can do. Usually by the time you discover that you've had a data breach, it can actually be some time down the line. So, you will often discover it a long time after the original breach actually happened. So it can take a lot of forensics to do it. So the important thing is to understand where the data is going out of and shut it down as quickly as possible to stop any more data going. Importantly though, don't just delete all of your systems and start again. If you delete all of your systems and start again, you'll never find out how they got in there. So most important thing is, understand quickly how you can stop the data getting out there, and then basically lock that down, stop it happening, and then spend the time and effort to really understand how they got in and how they did it. Otherwise, if you don't, they will just use the same attack again and they'll be straight back in a fortnight. And next time they'll hide their tracks better. Probably the most important thing, though, is know who's responsible for it in your organisation and make sure that they have a plan to deal with it, know who they need to contact, what your plans are. If, heaven forbid, you do get a ransomware attack, which basically affects hundreds of your PCs or devices, there's a very good chance that you might need to delete them all, reinstall them all and start again. So actually, in that case, knowing that you've got backups of everything and knowing how to restore them and having practiced restoring the backups and tested them is also absolutely critical.
Or have a product that can roll back. So have an antivirus product that can roll back.
Absolutely. Sentinel one is great for that.
Yeah. Gents, I'm mindful it's coming up to 11 o'clock, so thank you for your input today. I have to confess that was even more fascinating than I thought, because I'm not Mr. Techie, it's fair to say, so that was top job. There are some questions we've not managed to answer, and I've taken a copy of the chat while you guys were talking, so I will put those again. Have you got another slide, chaps, with your contact details on?
That was on the previous slide.
It's on the previous slide, because what I'll do is after this, I'll get the copy of the recording, and what I'll do is I'll mail it out to everybody, but right there in front of you, you've got contact details if you've got some personal questions that you'd like to ask any of the team. So Alan, Phil, thank you very much for your contribution. Excellent. And everybody on the recording today and in the webinar and fellow members of the Chamber of Commerce, I do thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being members as well. So on that note, I'd like to wish you all good morning, and hopefully I will see you again very soon. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.